Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for tuning in today. Our topic is something that concerns us all, our immune system. We're going to be talking about why it's so important and, more importantly, how to strengthen your immune system. My guest is Dr. Bob Lahita, author of the book Immunity Strong, Boost Your Natural Healing Power and Live to 100. Dr. Bob, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you.
So tell us, what motivated you to write this book?
Well, I was writing it, believe it or not, before the pandemic happened. I was very interested in conveying to patients and to the public the exact nature of the immune system and what autoimmune disease was. And then came the pandemic, and this book naturally folded itself into the pandemic with COVID. Now, it's clear that the public needs to know how the immune system works, why it does what it does, and how you can protect yourself and strengthen your immune system to live, as I say on the cover, beyond the age of 100, which is possible today.
Oh, I love that. That's the goal, isn't it? And not only to live to 100, but to live well, to live healthy until age 100. So what I thought was really interesting about your book is you called the immune system your biological soul. I've never really heard that term before. What made you come up with that?
Well, I was sitting with my wife talking about the immune system, and she's an artist and knows absolutely nothing about immunity. And so I was explaining what the immune system was, the complexities, which, by the way, I go out of my way to simplify in the book. But when we started talking about it, she said, well, you know, this is like a biological soul. She's very spiritual. And she said, the spiritual soul, you know, goes on after death. But during life, we have this really pervasive biological force, and that's the immune system. And she says, let's call it a biological soul. And I thought that was a great idea because it dies when we die, but it strives to keep you alive for as long as it can. And it has to subvert a lot of different infections throughout your life. Bacteria, viruses, as we know with COVID, parasites, depending on where on the planet you live. Everyone has a biological soul. And interestingly enough, even animals, and some say plants, have these protective networks, which for all intents and purposes are immune systems within their own sphere. So they have biological souls as well.
So how does the immune system vary from person to person? How important is it to have a strong immune system? And, you know, do we all basically have the same strength in our immune systems?
Not all of us do. And some of it depends on what we call immunogenetics. That is, what you've inherited from your ancestors. Their immune systems can either be weakened or strengthened. But everyone has the capability of taking their immune system, regardless of immunogenetics, and strengthening it with things like diet, etc. Now, as I go into the various aspects in the book, I talk about the microbiome as being very important. And those are organisms that live on us and within us. And when I say within us, the GI tract, gastroenterological tract, is loaded with trillions of bacteria, parasites, and even viruses. They are responsible for your health.
Well, I want to get back to gut health. That's fascinating, but a little bit complicated. Another thing that I found really fascinating and quite uplifting is how important prayer is, a spiritual life is to your immune system. Can you sort of elaborate on that?
Yes. Well, we start with stress, and stress is probably the most adverse influence that the immune system has. If you're stressed out from a divorce, a death in the family, an exam you have to take, a loss of a job, your host resistance goes down. Now, stress is really mediated by meditation and spirituality. Regardless of what your religious beliefs are, spirituality exists in all of us. And this biological soul, ironically, what a great name, and I attribute that to my wife. The biological soul really depends a lot on lowered stress, and it depends on spirituality. So you can do, as the Chinese, for example, do Tai Chi and Qi Gong, all these meditative physical methods. We in the Western Hemisphere use a lot of yoga and going to church, going to temple, going to the synagogue. all supports and bolsters your spirituality and really raises your host resistance. So the more spiritual you are with your spiritual soul, the stronger your biological soul is.
And do you have any kind of data to quantify? For example, if you pray for 30 minutes a day, is that better than just going to church for an hour a week?
There's no data on that, but being a scientist, we have studied over the years rats that are stressed, mice experiments, and we know from experience with patients that in the case, take autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, if somebody is stressed out, their disease flares, their disease becomes worse. And they always wonder, and patients ask me this all the time, I just got a divorce and I've never hurt so much, I can't sleep, I've developed fibromyalgia, I have trouble getting out of bed in the morning. So there's ad hoc experiences, anecdotal experiences, but to take like 10,000 patients and study them, that has not been done at this time with regard to spirituality.
Well, when you talk about stress being such a negative influence on your immune system, a lot of people say, but I can't help it. I have to drive in traffic every day. I've got 6 kids. I just have a stressful life. What are some other ways besides prayer and a spiritual life to help reduce stress?
Well, you can make sure that you get enough sleep. Make sure that you carve out a time of the day for yourself, be it 15 minutes or 30 minutes. It's really important. If you're a-religious and you have no religious and spiritual background, just carve out time for your own personal self. Because remember, as I mentioned in the early part of the book, the response team inside of you, this immune system is like a police department in a city. And this city has to be nurtured. It has to be kept healthy. You can let it fall apart, as many of our urban environments are, and the city goes to pot and crime rises. The same thing happens with your immune system. It's a great analogy. If you don't take care of your city, your personal metropolis, and you let your host resistance go down, you're going to get pneumonia. You may get a disease like cancer. You may get an autoimmune disease. And it's very important to know that you and you alone are in control of your biological soul.
Wanted to get back to what you were talking about, the gut microbiome, the good bacteria in our intestines. And you say in your book that it affects all of our body, not just our GI tract.
Right. It affects everything. It affects the heart and lung, and it affects brain health. And we have the mind, body, spirit. You've heard a lot about that. The brain is basically in control of what goes on host resistance wise. And I dare say that the brain is it's a privileged site in our body, meaning it has its own immune parameters. It has its own cytokines or chemicals that regulate the way the cells go. It has its own little personal immune system with astrocytes and with microglial cells. And they relate to the rest of the body, the circulation, the vascular system, whether your blood pressure is high or low, whether your heart beats faster or slower. We all know, and implicitly or intuitively, we know that the way we behave depends on how our physiology goes. So we can willfully lower our heart rate or raise our heart rate depending. All of that has a lot to do with control of immune function and making sure that you're resistant to various infections. And I think the most important thing is that COVID has brought this all to the fore. Everybody realizes that this is really key, and they know more about immunity now than they ever did in their lives.
Absolutely. We've been seeing this play out in our everyday lives. Well, we're going to take one quick break and be right back with Dr. Bob Lahita. The book is called Immunity Strong, Boost Your Natural Healing Power and Live to 100. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living, and we're continuing our discussion with Dr. Bob Lahita, author of the book Immunity Strong. Dr. Lahita, you mentioned that improving our gut microbiome and reducing stress are 2 fabulous ways to improve our immune system. Can you give us some others?
Yeah, first of all, let's go back to the microbiome. And people get probiotics and prebiotics in the supermarket, and right now it's a very popular thing to use prebiotics and probiotics. And basically what you're doing is making sure that you have friendly bacteria to restore the flora or the bacteria of your gut. And you do that with sauerkraut, kefir, yogurt, tempeh, kimchi for those Asian friends we have, and for the Japanese, miso. Very, very important. All of this to really enhance your microbiome in the gut. But remember, there's biomes everywhere: the lung, the heart, the skin, and probably even in the calvarium or the skull or the brain. So that's very, very important. And there's also all sorts of other things that we have to consider. Light cycles, your circadian rhythm. When I say get enough sleep, I really mean it. You need at least 6 to 7 hours of sleep per night. If you don't sleep, see your doctor. You've got to have a good rest. Vitamin D, zinc, calcium, things like antioxidants, pomegranate juice, grapefruit juice, natural vegetables. All of these things are very important to vital and healthy immune function.
So you mentioned probiotics. A lot of us take a probiotic supplement, and there are so many of them on the market. Which ones do you recommend? Are there good ones? Are there bad ones? Do people need to take them every day? It seems kind of confusing.
If you can take it every day. Now, I don't endorse any particular product because, frankly, I don't know of specific products. I know my family uses gut juice. You can buy it in the supermarket. You can buy fermented fruits. I eat yogurt daily. I make sure I have a bowl of yogurt with some granola on it. And believe it or not, I eat that as a dessert after dinner. I don't eat it in the morning. In the morning, I just go with my coffee, and I try to avoid bagels and donuts if I can, and just keep with proteins like eggs. So everybody has a different way of doing things. I'm not prescribing a particular product because I really don't know much about the different probiotics that are out there. I know there are many, however.
So you definitely recommend the probiotics found in food. And, you talked a lot about what we should be doing, the fruits and the vegetables and the probiotic foods. What should we be avoiding to keep our gut microbiome strong?
Well, avoid indiscriminate use of antibiotics. I have so many patients that go to doctors, family practitioners or internists, and they say, I have a cold, I need an antibiotic. And the doctor writes it. Don't do that. Viruses cause colds. There's no antibiotic for COVID. If you take an antibiotic, you obliterate your immune microbiome. And your microbiome is important to guarantee that whatever vaccine you take for COVID or for any other thing like influenza, that it works. You have to have a good microbiome to have the vaccine work.
Is it true that things like too much sugar and processed foods actually hurt the microbiome? And what about artificial sweeteners?
Yes, artificial sweeteners are fine. I use them all the time. If you have diabetes type 2, which is endemic in our country, people tend to use artificial sweeteners for everything. And everything that you eat that's sugar-free has an artificial sweetener in it to make it tasteful. And that is really not, that's harmless. That doesn't affect your biome. Sugars at high levels, yes. Basically, you want to avoid high sugar drinks. For example, sodas that have a lot of sugar in it, et cetera. Those are not good. And this is particularly relevant to children who tend to eat a lot of sugar. This is not good because their immune systems are developing. And we could discuss pregnancy and children in some detail, as I do in the book.
All right, we're going to take another quick break and be right back with Dr. Bob Lahita, author of the book Immunity Strong. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Bob Lahita, author of the book Immunity Strong. Dr. Bob, you mentioned try not to take an antibiotic because, as you said, it obliterates your gut microbiome. What if you have to? I recently had surgery, and my doctor said I had to take an antibiotic. How do we come back from that?
Well, that's where the probiotic comes in. You take the probiotic like yogurt, fermented foods, and you reinstate or repopulate your bowel. That's precisely what yogurts and lactobacillus, for example, acidophilus is all about, which you can buy in the supermarket. You take that, you repopulate your microbiome. And this is one aspect of keeping your immune system healthy and strong. Very, very important.
So you mentioned the gut microbiome, stress, sleep. What are some other ways that we really, some other habits that we need to form to strengthen our immune system?
Yeah, and that's good that you mentioned that, because smoking should stop. That is very detrimental to the immune system. Use of excessive amounts of alcohol, use of illicit drugs like heroin, cocaine, very, very destructive to immune function. So that is to be completely avoided. And of course, a bad lifestyle where you don't get enough sleep and you're under a lot of stress. All of that, lowers your lifespan and is going to allow you to have host resistance, which is low. And unfortunately, people in certain socioeconomic brackets who don't eat properly, who are poor, and I feel for the poor because they do have horrendous immune function, at least what we see in the hospital with these kinds of patients who come in and have been really have a double whammy: bad immunogenetics as well as bad socioeconomic conditions, heavy smokers, use of illicit drugs, alcoholism, etc. All of that really knocks your biological soul out.
So when you talk about alcohol, a lot of people consume alcohol. What are the safe limits?
Oh, if you're a moderate drinker, I'm not talking about drinking a glass of wine every night. I'm talking about somebody who knocks off a pint of gin every day or drinks a case of beer each day over the weekend. That's the kind of alcohol that really is immunosuppressive. We know that's immunosuppressive from laboratory data. Laboratory studies show that you can inhibit T and B cell function, for example, by drinking too much alcohol. And it doesn't have to be hard liquor. It can be too much wine or too much beer as well.
And when you talk about illegal or illicit drugs, marijuana is actually not illegal in many places these days. Where do you come down on that?
Well, if you smoke it, it is as heavy a risk as if you are smoking cigarettes, even though it lacks the nicotine, but it still is smoking. And we have vascular diseases like a very complex disease like thromboangiitis obliterans, which we occasionally see, that is enhanced by smoking anything. You can vape, you can smoke marijuana, you can smoke cigarettes and get the same effect. Now, does THC or tetrahydrocannabinol, does it have an adverse effect on immune function? I don't think there's a lot of data out there to show that at this time.
And what about CBD oils? Do you have an opinion on those?
Yeah, I think those are pretty good. I prescribe those for patients in severe pain. The oils are used, and there's really no adverse effect that we can see on immune function.
All right, we're going to take one final break and be right back with Dr. Bob Lahita. The book is called Immunity Strong. Welcome back to Healthy Living, continuing our discussion with Dr. Bob Lahita, author of the book Immunity Strong. And, one thing that you talked about in the book was the danger of being isolated, which so many of us have been during the pandemic, Dr. Bob.
Yes, isolation, lack of socialization, very, very bad for immune function. Companionship, raises hormones within the blood. This is well known: oxytocin, prolactin. These are two very vital hormones that are important for immune function. The neuroendocrine network really affects immune function. And all of that, by the way, is guided by the brain. So when you live by yourself, you're lonely. You don't know what to do with yourself. You have no companionship, no socialization, as we saw with the pandemic. This is not good. So even getting a dog to hug or having another person, a spouse, of course, a cousin, or a partner. And sexual relations is extremely intimate relations, very, very important to the immune system. I have a whole part of that in the book, in a chapter on sexuality and companionship, gender hormones, and of course, pregnancy, which is very, very important to understand with regard to immunity. Can you elaborate on that? What do people need to know about pregnancy and immunity? Well, you've heard a lot of this in the media about the importance of vaccination when you're pregnant to save you and the baby. And it's important, if you're planning to get pregnant, to get vaccinated. And by the way, there's a whole chapter on vaccines and their safety. And you don't have to be worried about vaccines like many people are. But pregnancy is a very special time in the immune system of the mother. And she imparts a lot of immunity to the baby, who is born with the mother's immune system for a couple of months until the baby's own immune system kicks in. Also, the baby gets organisms as he or she leaves the womb. And I talk about cesarean sections as not being that healthy for a good immune system going forward. And that's very, very important. I could elaborate on that, but better thing to do is get the book and read the section on pregnancy, sex, gender, and hormones. Very important stuff.
Well, you talk about gender. Do men and women, does one gender have a better immune system than the other?
The female, certainly. The female immune system is exceedingly complex. And I have spoken about this in lectures over the past 30 years. There's no question that the woman's ability to carry a fetus, which is antigenically or genetically dissimilar from herself without rejecting it, is why the immune system of the mother is so valuable, why the female immune system is so far superior to the male. Now, we know that more men have died of COVID than women as a rule. And we were trying to understand that 2 years ago when this pandemic began. We still don't quite understand it, but we have the feeling that it's because the female immune system is so robust and is so able to handle infections more than a man can.
Well, I feel like we've really just touched the surface, scratched the surface, I should say, on this whole issue of immunity, which we're all interested in now more than ever before. Dr. Bob, where can people find your book and find out more about you?
Any good bookseller will have the book. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other books. Costco, I'm told, has a supply of my books because they chose it for this year's book of the year, I believe, with another book. And you can go on my website, drboblahita.com, and get more information from that.
All right. Well, Dr. Bob, it was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your fantastic work, for the book. Highly recommended. And thank you for being here today on Healthy Living.
Thank you.
All right. And once again, the book is called Immunity Strong, Boost Your Natural Healing Power and Live to 100. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Healthy Living. We'll see you again next time.